Welcome to the Game Before the Money podcast, an oral history of pro and college football. The Game Before the Money is a 501c3 nonprofit. You can make donations and read great football history articles at thegamebeforethemoney.com. Hi everyone, I'm Michael Jackson. This is the Game Before the Money podcast. A different kind of show today, but I think it's really important to document the changes in college football that are happening in real time. College football is going to have a salary cap, and there's going to be revenue sharing with the players. A lot of players have hired agents, and this has gone way beyond NIL. I've put together clips from the recent Texas High School Coaches Association convention press conferences with SMU head coach Rhett Lashlee, Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian, Texas A&M head coach Mike Elko, TCU head coach Sonny Dykes, Baylor head coach Dave Aranda, University of Houston head coach Willie Fritz, Texas Tech head coach Joey McGuire, and UTSA head coach Jeff Traylor. The coaches will discuss player salaries, how money affects recruiting, how they are personally navigating the rule changes, how the universities are navigating the changes. This is a deep, real-time look into college football and the changes that are happening from the perspective and stories of these high-level coaches. No gloss, no spin, just real stories. Many of the coaches will later give their take on their team's upcoming season later in the podcast. And at the end of the show, I'll try to give you just a little bit of an overview of the rule changes and how they'll be enforced. But let's jump right in with the coaches. Here are SMU head coach Rhett Lashlee, Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian, and TCU head coach Sonny Dykes discussing their impressions about revenue sharing.
I think we're too early for me to have a great handle, to be honest with you, because it started on July 1, and honestly, that's when we try to unplug the most. I think the biggest transition for players is they're already on your team, and they're transitioning to actual contracts with universities. That's totally different than contracts with a collective. You know what I mean? And so you go from these small, almost MOU type agreements to an actual long-form contract, like the real world. And so that's a transition that our athletic departments had to go under, players are having to adapt to. Doesn't mean the numbers or whatever that have been agreed to have to change, but there's still, it's a contract. A lot of us in the real world know what contracts look like. It hadn't been that way. So I think that's probably the biggest thing so far.
You know, ideally, I would love to deal with high school coaches more. And I think there's a responsibility of the high school coaches to not just fall prey to, well, now there's money and there's agents and my role's been diminished. I think they need to be bullish to not let their role be diminished. And we would prefer that, quite frankly. Agents are going to be a part of this, and let's not act like they're not. They are. But I think there can be a working relationship for the best interests of the players and the student athletes that we are recruiting. And so I do think that that's important. But I just think we need to be cautious not to throw our hands in the air and say, well, the agents are doing it now and my role's been diminished. I think high school coaches have had such an impact on student athletes for so long that now's not the time to not be bullish, to remain a part of their lives, especially in one of the biggest decision of their lives that they're getting ready to make.
It's interesting, yeah, because, I mean, we talk about guys now being a good value. You know what I mean? And so, you know, you find these players sometimes that you know, they used to be kind of a, you know, hidden gem or a diamond in the rough, and now it's a good value. And so, you know, you have these kids that maybe aren't at the high profile programs that, you know, don't have agents that are, you know, over assessing their value by 2 or 3 times, you know, and all the things. And so it's really interesting right now because it really hasn't changed the way we recruit much, you know, because we've always been, you know, let's go recruit guys that fit our profile. Got to figure out who they are, what values, are important in their program? What kind of people do they want to attract? And I think they have to, at that point, decide, okay, here's what we're comfortable doing, and here's how we're going to do it. And so I think that's where it all begins for us. And it is 100% about finding the right people.
Baylor's Dave Aranda discussed his biggest fear of money in college football and its effects on the Big 12 Conference.
I think rev share will be a benefit for Big 12 schools. Some type of balanced, hopefully balanced level playing field would be a benefit. I think we're all waiting for really strong enforcement, and everyone wants to see what that looks like, But I think right now, I think it's probably too early to tell. I think some of what you're seeing are, especially in our league, is that there's teams that knew that the rev share era was coming and front-loaded deals to have money freed up in rev share to make bigger deals to close out guys at this time. And so, that's kind of the color that kind of colors this space that we're in right now. I think once we get to after the season, moving forward, January and all that going forward, I think that's when, hopefully there's a level playing field. And I think, there's so many great options with schools and head coaches and personalities within the state and history and just all of it for kids from Texas their families can go to all the games, and there's rivalries and there's traditions and all this stuff. And so there's such great opportunities, I think, for it to be where, hey, this school gives you $4 and we can give you $4 and all this other thing evens out like that. I think, that's a benefit to our league. What the biggest fear with me with all of that was the power that comes with buying players, I guess. When you can buy something, then you can sell that something, Some easily bought's easily sold. And, I think there's a greater connection if there's understanding of, hey man, this is where this dude's coming from. This is kind of his challenges. Here's his talents. We want to be able to take him from point A to point B. Football is a part of that, but it's not all of that. That's a whole different thing than I'm buying something and it don't work. Get out of here. Get me something new. And that's all around us. Like, everybody's wet with that, And so it just makes it kind of an ill deal. And, I think like for us to be competitive and to be talented and everything, like it kind of, from where we were, which is probably like a Disney movie, you can't, we weren't winning the Disney way. And so like to get to where you're way aggressive, acquiring talent, doing all those things, you have to get wet a little bit. And that, I don't know. I'm not comfortable with that. But you have to try to have your integrity and find a balance. And I'm still trying to do that. But that's all the time. I don't know. Do you have to do that to win? That sucks. Yeah.
Texas Tech is a program that's jumped full in on the revenue sharing and paying players. Here is Red Raiders head coach Joey McGuire discussing their approach.
I don't know what Texas's payroll was last year or Ohio State's payroll was last year, but nobody was surprised when they were doing it at that level. And then all of a sudden Texas Tech decides that we're going to be extremely aggressive in the two worlds, and do it the right way. That it shouldn't be done at Texas Tech. And so I kind of, I'm like, hey, I understand there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be excited to play us, to prove us wrong, to say, hey, look, you went out and spent all this money and this is what your team looks like. I know our guys are going to focus on us. We talk about it all the time. We got to control what we can control. I know there's a lot of expectations. I think expectations are great. I would rather be in that position than be in a position where you're like, man, if everything goes right and the ball bounces our way, maybe we can become bowl eligible. I'd rather be on the other side of like, hey, we expect you guys to go out and play for the Big 12 championship. Now we just got to go out and back everything up. And I will tell you, our locker room is in a really good place. We have a really good culture. We're a very close team, and they're excited to prove that we did the things the right way and that we've got a really good football team.
Okay, players now have agents. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. Coach McGuire of Texas Tech and Coach Aranda of Baylor had some comments about that, interesting comments that I think were important to share. We'll start with Coach McGuire.
We need to have a certification for agents. I think that there should be, like the NFL, there should be a cap on the percentage that agent can make off of that player whenever it comes to NIL and revenue sharing. And at some point, hopefully we get to there. But we deal with a lot of different people. You deal with guys that are representing NFL players at the highest level, that they have an agency that now they have another department that handles college NIL. You deal with some guys that are just getting in the business, but they're really good at what they do and they have a good background at understanding contracts. And then you still deal with an uncle or a ex-coach or you deal with all kinds of levels. And the one things that I would say about that, I think it's good to deal. I don't deal with them very much. James Blanchard does, but I think it's good to have a representative because you can take out a lot of emotion. That's whenever the negotiations get really bad, when they get emotional. And so whenever you have a guy that knows exactly what he's doing and you have our GM and they're negotiating and talking through everything, it's really business. It's more black and white, everything like that. Whenever you get it in where you do have guys that, parents or anything like that get emotional, like any other, they love their kids and they think this is what they should be doing. That's whenever it's really tough. But there's a lot of guys that are getting represented. They've never seen a contract in their life. They don't know what anything looks like or anything like that. And so, just like anything else in this world, this is real money. And you've got some people that are taking advantage of players. We've dealt with, some great individuals and we appreciate them. And then we've dealt with some individuals that on our side, we were like, I don't really know if this guy knows what he's talking about whenever he's talking about a contract. And then the percentage of the contract that he wants to take is kind of out. Nobody would sign that contract. And there's some kids that do, with some different agents.
There are times where you hear from agents that, hey, it has to be this, or we're not even taking a visit, and we try to be able to avoid those situations and the recruits that come with that. What I was talking about a little bit was more of like, the best behavior is always good, but we don't, that can get exhausting if a kid comes and, hey, here's the structure and our meetings and be 10 minutes early and have your, all this other stuff, have your notebooks out and all that. If, they're trying really hard in that space and it's kind of like, their true personality is not coming out. Like we want them in the meeting early and all that, but we want not their representative to be there. We want it to be them,
Traditionally, a lot of recruiting was always done through relationships with high school coaches and building relationships with players, parents, grandparents, and other family members. With money being so prominent now, many questions were asked about whether traditional relationships mattered as much. Here are Texas A&M head coach Mike Elko, SMU head coach Rhett Lashlee, Texas head coach Steve Sarkisian and Texas Tech head coach Joey McGuire with their thoughts.
Yeah, I think recruiting is really a 2-year process from a relationship standpoint, and I think when we got hired, obviously the 24 class was done, and you had about 8 days to figure out what you were doing there, and really you were a year into the 25s, and so while I think we were able to put together a really strong class, there were also a lot of kids that from a relationship standpoint we were just a year behind when we started, and so we felt like from the beginning 26 was going to be the first time we were on a level playing field from relationship building and evaluating and communicating. And so, I think time always helps. And I don't know that everybody truly understands how long the recruiting process is for the top end players in the country. There's so many levels of what we're trying to do. There's, identification, there's evaluation, there's acquisition. All of that kind of falls into the world of recruiting nowadays, and a lot of people have a lot of different parts of that. But there's also just a part of it that is relationships, and there's a part of it when you put together a recruiting staff that is just who is the guy that is making sure high school coaches know when we're practicing, who is the guy that knows how high school coaches can get tickets, who is the guy that can be the contact point when high school coaches come on our campus. And so, there's a part of it that's just relationships with high school coaches. I think we've tried to really emphasize game day. I think one of the things that has always struck me about Texas A&M is, when you come to Texas A&M in April and you come to Texas A&M in September on a Saturday night when we're playing a game, there's a really different feel and vibe. And so, we tried to get a lot of kids out to games last fall. Obviously, we had a lot of primetime matchups to attract players too. That was helpful. That's something that I think is really big. Our difference maker is Kyle Field. When you're in Kyle Field on a Saturday, your impression of Texas A&M is different. And I think it's one of the things that maybe was lost my first time around. I don't know how much credit was given to the Alabama game in 2021 for the amount of kids that decided to join the Texas A&M program that year. You know what I mean? Like that atmosphere that night, what that felt like. Excuse me. A lot of those kids that wound up in that 22 class were at that game. And certainly a lot of the kids that stuck in the program were at that game. And so, I just think we've tried to shift to really emphasize that, and it's not necessarily the big recruiting event or the big, this, that, or the other. It's get them to Kyle when we are playing and let them see what the passion of Texas A&M football is really about. And that's been really big for us.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I think it still always comes back to relationships, whether it's coaching a team this year to win this year, whether it's recruiting high school kids, recruiting transfers, keeping the staff intact. We believe it's all about relationships. And so that's what we focus on internally, and I think that's what we focus on externally in this state. We're in Texas. We're at this event because it's the best event in America every year. It's the best run event. It's the best run association. We have the best high school leaders, coaches, and mentors leading and coaching and developing the players that we get to go recruit and pull from. And so that relationship's huge. And so it's a great question, because at the end of the day, yes, money's involved. It's more transactional than ever before, but there's still a huge relationship component, one, to getting to the point where you can close the deal, or once they're on your team, retaining them.
Well, I think it's hugely important. We've got a couple former coaches on staff in Chris Gilbert and Jamal Fenner, who are both, tremendous high school coaches in the state of Texas, that forge great relationships, not only with, the high school coaches in the state, but the student athletes, the connections that they have maybe through third parties, so on and so forth. And so those things are immensely important to us. And to think that is going to go away, I think we would be remiss. And I know a lot of coaches want to get up here and sing the blues to you and say everything's just transactional now and it's this and it's that. I don't believe that. And I just don't believe that, because I know the roster that we have on our team. I know the relationships we have with the players on our team. Is there a business aspect now, a component that has been built in? Sure there is. But coaches are under contracts, and we've got great relationships. And so we can still have really good relationships and there still be a business component to what we do. And if those relationships do matter, then individuals like that, or whether it's Brandon Harris, our general manager, or John Michael Jones, and all that in that department are critical for our success in forging those relationships. Because if it was all just about money, then yeah, I might sign a decent class, but they're not made of the right stuff that what I'm looking for. It might be better somewhere else. And so, I just think that it's, we'd be remiss to push that to the side and say it's all transactional, because at that point, now we're just accumulating talented people and we're not really forming a really good team. And teams win championships. We don't play tennis. We don't play golf. We play football. It's a team sport, and we've got to build teams year after year.
Yeah, it's huge. We're still, if you track, since we've been at Texas Tech, we're usually the player's first offer or the player's first Power 4 offer. We want to get in early. We want to trust our process, and we want to develop those relationships. And as it goes, we're really fortunate. We do that. We get them on campus. We've been able to get kids on campus. They walk into a football resort. It's the best facility in the country. So now no one can say, well, we've got better facilities or Tech doesn't have good facilities. When you walk in there, and if you've been told that, the player's probably going to laugh at you from the standpoint. And whenever they see the upgrade there and then, the things that we're doing off the field, I think it's really healthy. Parents see that. They're excited about that. And then the revenue share is the last piece. Our university chose to share at the highest level. I was in on a young man. I'm not going to talk about him because he doesn't play for me. But I was in on a young man at the beginning. We had a phenomenal relationship. And at the end of the day, if we were in rev share, in the world of rev share, we would have got the kid. Instead, he went to somewhere else. He's not there anymore, but he went to somewhere else because of that final piece. What I think you're seeing now is you're recruiting. We're doing, Baylor's doing a phenomenal job. BYU's doing a phenomenal job. Sonny at TCU's doing a phenomenal job. And then you get right there and maybe a bigger school, whenever you're talking about football tradition, comes in and says, hey, we want to offer you a scholarship, and you lose that kid. Well, now with rev share, I think you're able to close that gap and get those kids committed to you and try to hold on to them like crazy in December. And I think you're seeing that in the Big 12.
Houston head coach Willie Fritz discuss the effects of the new rules affecting incoming freshmen.
You bring a guy in, he doesn't play for you, that money is used for development of the student athlete, and you got to understand that when you're recruiting an incoming freshman. So that's very important. And, it's not going to change. It's going to be more difficult for an incoming freshman to come in and start and make a huge impact his first year. You get a guy who can do that. He's a really, really special player. So you got to understand when you're looking at all this, when you're, figuring out your roster and how you're giving out money. Hey, this guy's a freshman, and it might take him a couple of years to show us exactly what he can do.
So now with the new salary cap implemented in college football is becoming more and more like the NFL. So colleges are now faced with figuring out ways to manage their salary caps. How are they doing that? Here are Coach Lashlee of SMU, Coach Elko of Texas A&amp, Coach McGuire of Texas Tech, Coach Dykes of TCU, and Coach Fritz of Houston, outlining some strategies.
With regards to how we do the cap internally, I think everyone's different. I think our school is great. We're choosing to maximize the cap for all athletics, and which also for football. And if you maximize the cap based on the percentages, you're somewhere in that 13 to 16 range for football. So you may not be the highest, but you're in the range, right? And so how you choose to use that is then where the strategy comes in, if everybody's buying into that. So it's year one. We're going to learn. We think we have an idea, like by position. Hey, this is how much we want to allocate for these positions. At the same time, I think anyone would tell you, if you have a chance to make your team better, you're going to try to find ways to do that, and that may maybe put more over here and less over here that year. And so I think having a plan and having a system internally is important, but then also having the flexibility to change with the times, learn as you go, and then maybe as certain situations arise, make decisions you need to do what's best for your program and your team right now. That flexibility, I think, is important.
I'm a football, been studying football forever. That's just kind of who I've been. And, for so many years, you heard the NFL coaches complain about their lack of roster management control, right? And every head coach in the NFL hated the fact that somebody else had complete and total control of his roster. Now you're seeing it play out in college, and you're seeing college coaches talk about how they want someone else to handle roster management. And so I'm the other way. I want to be aware of everything that we're doing. I want to be involved in every one of those decisions. I don't necessarily want to be involved in every one of those conversations. I don't think that's healthy, but I think, as you're talking about, how to allocate resources, what positions, what players, what you want to do from a retention standpoint. To me, there's a part of that's the fun part of the job, because you're trying to build the most competitive roster that you can. And I'm not in a position yet in my life where I really want to delegate that too much. And Derek Miller does an unbelievable job. And so I don't want to take away from his role. It's very collaborative, and Derek has a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of times where he'll have ideas that I'm like, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's do that. But we sit down together and kind of go through that every step along the way.
The one thing that's been really good for us is my AD that I work for, I think is the best in the country, Kirby Hocutt, and then our chairman of our board of regents, Cody Campbell. They both have challenged us 2 years ago, a year ago. Like, this is not like, hey, if this passes, hey, what's the plan? How are we going to handle this? And so we've been working on this model for a good while, and the revenue share model, and how we're going to share, and the salary cap, and how that looks like, and what percentage of that goes to your left tackle, what percentage of that goes to your quarterback, and on down the line. And so we've been working on this for a good while now, and that piece is the last piece. It still comes down to relationships, and you want to be around kids that they love football, they want to be developed. And then there is real money, so that money piece is going to come into to play. But that's the last thing we talk about whenever the kid's on campus. No matter what the number is, when you're talking about what a player's getting paid, the whole deal is the salary cap. What have you allotted to that room? So, just like the NFL, quarterbacks are going to get paid more. Guys that can hit the quarterback are going to get paid more. Guys that protect the quarterback are going to get paid more. If I've allotted ever how many millions of dollars to that room, how I use that money to one player or 10 players, that's on me.
And because if everybody's operating with the same pot of money, you hope that all this stuff at some point normalizes. You know what I mean? You hope that I think I mentioned this yesterday, you hope that the left tackle at Texas, and the left tackle at Texas A&M, and the left tackle at TCU and Baylor and Houston and SMU and all the different places, you hope those guys are making roughly the same amount of money. Because if that's the case, then the kids are going to be more likely to stick around, where they can't go someplace and get a quick payday.
You want to be fair. I'm glad I'm entering my second year because, you want to reward the kids that are in your program, first and foremost. And I wasn't really able to do that last year because we had a lot of holes to fill like came in later and some kids were gone and things like that. I didn't even get a chance to meet a lot of them. So, you want to definitely help out the guys that are showing it in the Big 12, that are successful and can play for you in the Big 12. So we've only got a couple of us that sit and talk. My coaches have no idea what anybody's getting. It's me and two other guys. And, we talk about it and we manage it and make sure we stay under the cap. I was talking to Dorian Williams. I told him, you're still playing. You'd be making a lot of money. I was talking to Tim Flanders about that at Sam Houston State. You didn't have to do this stuff, years ago, but now you do. And you just got to make sure you're as fair as you possibly can. And then you also got to do a good job positionally. You got to find out, you got X number of guys playing wide out, tight end, tight quarterback, etc. And, probably a few years ago, you might have had 6 guys on scholarship at quarterback, and now you might only have 4 because of the financial situation. Then you got to practice smart. You got to make sure you don't have quite as many guys on the squad as what you had in the past also. But, how we do it is like anybody. There's, I've got a lot of friends that some of whom I coached or coached with who are in the NFL. And, I got a lot of my information from them as far as how to structure a roster, and because there are a lot of similarities between it. And they've been doing it for 100 years. So you talk about the quarterback and the cover corner and the left tackle and the rush end and different positions that you put a premium on. And
all right, the NCAA is not in charge of enforcing salary cap rules. That will be handled by a group called the College Sports Commission. A popular question at the press conference was how confident coaches were in other teams following the new rules. And here are answers from TCU's Coach Dykes and SMU's Coach Lashlee.
My level of confidence is, I would say it's probably at 1%. So no, I don't have a lot of confidence. I mean, look, I don't know, with what some of the teams are spending this year, because we have an anomaly this year because you could front load all these contracts. And so what a lot of teams did is they went out, they raised money, they paid all of these players revenue share on the front end, which cleared up all the revenue sharing money on the back end. So you have this 1 year that's going to be really weird, and you have a lot of guys, as a result of that, making a lot of money because you really have an unlimited amount of money for this football season to pay players. So that created some pretty unusual things. And some teams really, went all in on that. But that's going to have to normalize. So I have a hard time believing that a number of schools, and a relatively significant number of schools, are going to come back a year later and say, oh, by the way, we're going to pay you guys half of what we paid you last year. I just don't see that happening. You know what I mean? And so I don't know. I don't know how that's going to play out.
I have 100% confidence that people will circumvent the cap and break rules because they've been doing it for decades, even when there wasn't a cap. So, recruiting is recruiting. Forever there was, this is how it is, and then certain people decided if and when they want to bend the rules, and if they don't get caught, they don't get caught. Like, that's not ever been not the case. It's not going to change. I think what we all want is some consistency with, here are the rules, and we are at least going to have structure to require people to abide by the rules, and if they don't, then there's penalties. It's that simple. So I don't know. I'm confident there's going to be plenty of people that are going to test the limits. Fine. It's if they do, what are the repercussions to make sure there's structure to our great game? I think the biggest question is how will it be enforced? Will it be a hard line on, no, this is what an NIL deal is, or a hard line on, no, this is the cap, you have to stay within the cap, and if you don't, here are the penalties. If it is, then I think we have a good system, or at least an improving system.
All right, and as Coach Lashlee noted, there's always been rule skirting in college football. I was fortunate enough to connect with Pro Football Hall of Famer Hugh McElhenney, and the joke always was that he took a pay cut to turn pro, and that's back in the 1950s. And you can hear more stories directly from Hugh McElhenney on episode 45 of the Game Before the Money podcast. And right now, let's talk about traditional values in college football: character development, education, community leadership. Are those now getting lost in the process with all of this money available? Here are TCU coach Sonny Dykes, Texas Tech coach Joey McGuire, and Houston Cougars head coach Willie Fritz.
I mean, the statistics are the statistics. 7% of Power 5 or Power 4 players are going to play one game in the NFL. 7%. Okay. 1.5% are going to get a second contract and really make a living playing football. So what we have to figure out how to do is all of our attention has been focused on the 1.5% of these kids that make a living playing football. And we've completely forgotten about the 98.5% that need to graduate from college, that need to be prepared to enter into the world with a degree that means something, and also some practical experience. You know, these kids have got to be able to do internships, and these guys have got to be able to do things that are going to allow them to be successful in their life down the road. And we get so caught up and so focused on the elite players and the way these things affect them. Well, what about the other 98.5%? You know, they're the ones that really need help. You know, the 1.5%, the guys that get the second contract, well, they're taken care of. We got to take care of the other guys. And I think we've really missed that. And I think we've done a really poor job of putting those facts out there. Because I think if you ask our team, you know, and we talk to every meeting, we're going to have a meeting with our players. That's going to be the first thing I tell them. Hey, the numbers are the numbers. 7% of you guys are going to play one game in the NFL. 1.5% are going to get a second contract. So take advantage of this opportunity that TCU affords you. And my hope is that when's the last time anybody said the word graduation? I mean, anybody. And so I've been the head coach now 15 years. We've gone from 15 years ago, the only thing that mattered was graduation. That's all anybody talked about was graduation rates, player retention, making sure that these guys graduate, making sure they're in real classes, to today where graduation is like a 4-letter word. You know what I mean? And so we've got to kind of get refocused a little bit, because again, this is higher education. Yeah, I know it's a big business, but at some point we have to kind of own that. And if we're not looking out for those kids, then what does it say about us ethically? And so I think we got to get some of these things fixed.
We're going on our third semester with a team GPA over a 3.0. And I think whenever I look at stuff like that, it shows that we're moving in the right direction, that we've got grown men in the building, that they're coming there for a lot of different reasons, but they're coming there at Texas Tech for the right reasons.
You know, every once in a while I'll get in the room and I'll tell them I'm going to talk about what I know you came here to talk about, academics. You know, they'll kind of look at me. And, but you know, I still stress it. I guess I'm old school. I think it's, you know, at the end of the day, you want to be someplace where you're going to help. You know, a young man wants to go somewhere where you develop them from 18 to 22 years of age. And, you know, I was, my brother had his 50th class reunion in Buffalo, New York this past weekend, and Dorian Williams plays for the Buffalo Bills. He played for me at, you know, Tulane, and great player for the Bills. He and I hooked up and talked for a few hours while I was there. That was a big part of the conversation. I want our guys to have the same experience at Houston that Dorian had when he was at Tulane. He's got a lifelong. I said, who do you still talk to? Man, he rambled off 20-some guys, because he was there for 4 years with me. And he's got his best friends with the guys he went to college with. So I still think you can do that in this day and age. You can build those lifelong relationships, and that's what we're going to do at the University of Houston.
All right. So as I'm editing this, I realize that, we're already at the 40-minute mark here on this episode. So I'm going to make this a multiple part series because we haven't even gotten to the transfer portal yet. Okay. And a lot of great things talked about there by the coaches. How are the new rules affecting the transfer portal? And then the coaches also got into their upcoming seasons. I want to cover that as well and tell you a little bit more about the Texas High School Coaches Association. I'll be doing that in the next episode of the Game Before the Money podcast, and I hope to get that out in the next week or two. Again, I'm just a one-man operation here, and really appreciate all the great listeners, y'all out there, and I look forward to bringing more of this immediate documentary of the history of college football shifting. There's really no debating that. I mean, we're in an era where college football has a salary cap now. And players have agents. Completely different than what we grew up with. And even what the players grew up with, right? And especially different from what these coaches grew up with. So I'll be working on episode 2 now. And thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Game Before the Money podcast. Special thanks to Bill and Debbie Butler for their generous donation, keeping this podcast on the air, as well as the website, thegamebeforethemoney.com, online. Please subscribe to the Game Before the Money podcast and visit thegamebeforethemoney.com. Transcriptions of some episodes of the Game Before the Money podcast are available at thegamebeforethemoney.com and are powered by our transcription partner, Sonics. Visit sonics.ai to learn more about their automated transcription services. And that's Sonics, spelled Sonix.